Our program will begin in just a few minutes. We'll be starting our program in just a few minutes. People are still entering. Welcome, everyone. I am Susan Myers, Executive Director of the Southwest Jewish Congress. You're in for a real treat this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. During this webinar, you can make yourself heard through the chat and Q&A functions. You should find these icons at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or it may be at the top of the screen if you're on a mobile device. Following Ms. Meek's presentation, we will have time for Q&A. Please type your questions into the Q&A section. Also, for improved bandwidth, please keep yourself muted and your video off. Now, I would like to turn the program over to Nelda Golden, Southwest Jewish Congress Vice President, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Susan.
Nelda?
Thank you, Susan. Southwest Jewish Congress brings you programs throughout the year on various topics free to all viewers. We look forward to seeing you at our next program on climate change, followed by one on dealing with stress, especially in times like this. Visit our website at www.swjc.org. We also partner with the Dallas Holocaust Center on their programs. SWJC has an ongoing project sending over 5,000 meals to first responders who are helping with the COVID-19 crisis. Contact the mentioned website for any information on all that we do. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Vicki Meek, and you are really in for a treat. We would like to thank Brenda Jackson, a valued member, for bringing Vicki to us in honor of Black History Month, which we do every year. Vicki was featured in the issue on February 7th in the Dallas Morning News in the Arts and Leisure section with illustrations of the beautiful pieces of art. Vicki is a native of Philadelphia, a recognized nationally artist who has exhibited widely. Meek is in the permanent collections of the African American Museum in Dallas, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Fort Wayne Museum of Art, Paul Quinn College, and Norwalk Community College in Norwalk, Connecticut. She has been awarded 3 public arts commissions with the Dallas Area Rapid Transit Art Program and was co-artist on the largest public art project in Dallas, the Dallas Convention Center Public Arts Project. She was selected as one of 10 national artists to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Nasher Sculpture Center with the commissioning of an on-site specific installation. In addition, Vicki is an independent curator and writes cultural criticism for her blog at Art and Race Notes and Dallas Weekly. With over 40 years of art administrative experience, Vicki retired in March of 16 as manager of the South Dallas Cultural Center, a full-service African-centered center that is a division of the City of Dallas Office of Cultural Artists. Enough of me, and now on to Vicki.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I particularly want to thank Brenda Jackson. As Nelda said, she's a friend of mine for many years, and she's the one that brought me to this day today. So thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Southwest Congress, Jewish Congress. So today, I want to take you on a little journey into my artistic life. I want to preface this presentation by giving you a little bit of background on my art practice. I was very fortunate to have parents who encouraged me every step of the way to explore my artistic expression in any way I wanted. And they did that with all of their children. So anything we decided we wanted to do, they were willing to support that endeavor. Growing up in Philadelphia in the 1950s provided a very rich and exciting cultural landscape for which to draw inspiration. I practically lived in the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Rodin Museum as a child. And so I got firsthand experience with art in its many forms from an early age. I also was presented with art books on Black artists by my parents so that I could see that my aspirations were not far-fetched, since at that time you saw very few Black artists, if any, in the museums. So one of those artists that they showed me was a woman named Elizabeth Catlett. She is now deceased, but she was somebody who I later was able to have as a mentor. And she was a sculptor and a printmaker, which was, I wanted to be a sculptor as a little kid. And so it was a way of me seeing that as a Black woman, I could actually do this. It was a very easily, not easily, but a very possible endeavor for me to undertake. The other reason that they showed me Elizabeth Catlett was because she was an artist who joined her work at the intersection of art and social justice. And as a child growing up in a family of social justice activists, I was able to see firsthand how I could potentially use my art in the service of social justice. And so this allowed me to really explore and use my imagination about how could I make my art useful in the struggle for social justice. So that's kind of the backdrop for this retrospective exhibition that I recently showed in both Houston and recently closed in Dallas at the African American Museum, entitled Vicki Meek, 3 Decades of Social Commentary. And so I'll begin to share some of that work with you now, and then talk you through the pieces as we go on this journey. So I'm going to share screen now and get that PowerPoint up for you to see. Let's see. Slideshow, where is it? There we are. Okay. So we aren't starting at the very beginning of my career, because at that point I was doing some other kinds of things, but we're going to start with when I really started to look at social commentary as a way of expressing, my concerns about things that were going on in America. And it started with some political commentary on drugs, particularly in the Black community. And I was particularly concerned about the way in which drugs were destroying our community with the help of our government, because we, of course, later were to find out that that was in fact a strategy used by the CIA, is to flood Black communities with drugs as an attempt to quell the Black movement, the Black Power movement that was happening all across the country. So the piece on the left is a piece called "The Lynching of the 80s Came in the Form of a Mighty Horse." And of course, that was a takeoff on the notion of real lynching, actual lynching that was taking place in century before, that now we were looking at drugs as being that form of killing off the Black community. This piece was shown in an exhibition called Forever Free, which was the first exhibition of Black women artists starting in the 1800s on up to the 1980s. And I was the youngest artist in that exhibition at that time. I had a companion piece to this that also was exploring the notion of self-inflicted violence, which this piece across from the one that you're looking at, this drawing, well, really it's a collage, it's a mixed media collage and drawing of violence, number one, self-destruction. That was a way of looking at the way we were self-destructing with drugs. And it had some specific statistics looking at the way in which heroin was taking people out. Basically it was doing it in two ways, both in terms of the addiction that we were seeing in widespread, and then the incarceration that came oftentimes as a result of these drugs being so prevalent in the community. And it wasn't like we were incarcerating the big guys, the people who were the big dealers. It was low-level drug dealers and addicts who were being incarcerated. And so that piece there is looking at the statistics and the fact that, in my view, these pieces both were done in the 80s. In my view, what was at the crux of the problem was this idea of not having a love of self. That's what led to the ability of the drugs to become so prevalent, that Black people were in such a state of lack of self-acceptance that allowed these drugs to flow in and be utilized as sort of a way of easing the pain, is one way of looking at it. And about that same time, at the end of the 80s, I began to explore a piece that I've done multiple times called "I Could Be Angry All the Time If I Think Too Hard." And it had many iterations. This is the last iteration that it had, and this was done in the 90s. You'll see the image in the picture of me in the 1980s. And I had a friend of mine, Patricia Meadows, told me one time that she could always tell when I was upset, even though I wasn't outwardly showing signs of being upset, because my lips would get ashen. And I never noticed it. I didn't know, I was not aware that was what was happening, but she told me that. And I started using that as a sort of metaphor for repressed anger in me. And so when you saw these pictures of me, I would have the lips white, and that would be my way of saying that, despite what I might look like, as you see the picture on the left, this is how I might appear to be. This is how I really feel. You see the image of what's really going on in my mind. And I start with a zombie-like figure, and then the flames behind me to basically talk about how enraged I might get, and then the target as to how I felt Black people often are in this country as a result of the violence against Black people. So that's what this piece was about. Now, the original piece had a soundtrack so that the people viewing it could put on earphones and they could listen to me literally ranting about various and sundry things that were upsetting me. And so the original piece I have not done in a long time with sound. And I wanted to show you the gallery at the African American Museum, because my curator Dr. Lauren Cross is a brilliant young woman, and she used the pieces to have basically dialogues, visual dialogues with each other. And so the piece that you see here, the drug piece, is in dialogue with the piece that I could be angry all the time if I think too hard. And then on the opposite wall, also in dialogue with I could be angry all the time if I think too hard, is a piece that was done on Ida B. Wells, who was the woman who really brought forth the big problem in America at the time of lynching, and crusaded for an anti-lynching bill to have the legislature pass an anti-lynching bill. And so that piece is across from, you'll see it in a later slide, is across from that I could be angry all the time as well. And in the 90s, I was invited to be a part of an exhibition that was looking at the 150-year anniversary of the so-called discovery of America that was initiated by a Latin American group. Because of course, you know, how do you discover a place that already is inhabited with people with their own culture and et cetera? So they were asking us to respond to that notion of discovery. And what I did was I did a lot of research on the Black presence in Mexico prior to you know, people being enslaved and coming to America, and the kinds of truths that are out there versus the lies that we've been told. So the saying Otito Hua and Oroso Juan are, one is their truths, our truths. So there's an indication that, you know, there's what you've been taught, and then there's what's the truth. The shell that you see on the shelf here, my grandmother made her first trip to Africa when she was in her 70s. That was her big dream, was to go to Africa. And she did finally get to do that when she was in her 70s. And she brought back this shell. And well, she brought back a number of things, but the shell she gave to me. And I use that shell in my work oftentimes to just sort of symbolize the connection to the ancestors. So you will see shells repeatedly throughout my installations used in that manner. And then the other element that is often used is the white candle. The blinds, the idea with the blinds was that you can turn the people who are viewing this are allowed to turn the blinds so that you can see one side is Otito Hua, the other side is Oroso Juan. And so it's the idea of there's always two sides to every story. And this piece is called Little Known Facts. So it is also about this time in the 90s when I begin to start thinking about the work from a slightly different lens. And I know that when I look back on why did this happen, I always attribute it to the fact that it was in the 80s that I became a mother. And becoming a mother, I think, really kind of humanized the kind of conversation I wanted to have around social commentary. And I began to look at exploring this through sort of African spirituality and cosmology. And so you begin to see elements of traditional African art being incorporated into the work that I'm doing. The use of the colors red and blue, both of those are protection colors in traditional African art. So those begin to be used in a symbolic way to indicate that I want to protect certain kinds of conversations or people or whatever. And whenever you see that blue, if it's like surrounding the person, you can assume that it's about my conversation, about protecting them. And this piece, Images of Power, I was really looking at the idea that, you know, we're always told that money is power, you know, that's what power is. But for me, that's the superficial elements of power. The real power comes from your spiritual being and your ability to connect to the spirits and the creator and your ancestors. And so this particular sculpture is a double-headed Shango sculpture. The snake is not a negative element. It is a symbol of continuity in traditional African art. And then the nails are associated with Ogun, who is one of the deities that is a warrior and a forceful individual. And then the little box on the right bottom there is a image of the Oja Inu and the Oja Ode, which are the idea of our inner eye sees the outer world, but it's the inner eye, which is the soul, that is what keeps us balanced. So that's what that little image down in the corner is about. And then I started doing things that were strictly about honoring our historic freedom fighters. And there are people who I consistently will honor. One of whom is Fannie Lou Hamer, who is the round circular piece on the right here. And you can see how it's displayed. There's three of them. That series was called My Bad Mama Jamma series, based on anybody that's got an R&B background knows that's a R&B song. She's a bad mama jamma. Because these women were cultural warriors and social justice warriors. After I did these three, I was invited to do a show in New Orleans, and I did the 8 that are the rectangular pieces. And just to give you a context of size, those pieces are 4 feet wide each. And the circular pieces are 30 inches wide. So that'll give you some context for the size of the pieces. So these pieces, the round pieces, I used statements that each of these women made about their, take on fighting for freedom. And then below them is a panel that it has an Udinkwa symbol. The Udinkwa symbols are Ghanaian symbols that are essentially proverbs that have meaning, and everybody in the community would know. If you saw that symbol, you'd know what that meaning was. So I took those symbols that I thought were most associated with the people who I'm representing. And so in this case with Fannie Lou, hers is a war horn or a warrior woman. And then the pieces with, here's another piece of Fannie Lou. This is one of the 4-foot pieces. The piece that the idea behind these pieces was that I was doing a sort of homage to their spiritual connection to their activism, because all of these people felt that they were really driven by God, basically, to do the work that they did. This series was called Cut from the Same Cloth, and you can see that strip, that Nigerian strip cloth at the bottom of each one. That cloth became my metaphor for the connection to our motherland. And then the 16 calories that are on each one of these is related to the 16-calorie divination system that you find in Yoruba tradition. And then the words "Mowawidi balewodi ngwi," those are Yoruba words that say, "I am a spirit, I come down to you." These images are all ghost, what I call ghost images. They're all done in white on black paper. They're all ghost images because all these people are now deceased. And then each one had a little sculpture that I decided belonged to them or defined them. And those are then tacked onto this wood with brass tacks, because my father always said when we were doing the work in the community and during the civil rights movement, that if you were really out there doing the work, you're getting down to brass tacks. So I use that brass tack often in my work to sort of symbolize that notion of being committed to a cause. Then the red, like I said before, is a protection color. So these little prints, the turtle, which is a symbol of continuity and perseverance and longevity and wisdom, is on each one of them. The rooster, which is a symbol of the ancestors, is also on each one of them. And then the goat, which would be a typical sacrifice to Oshun, who is the deity that I most identify with. And then behind each one of those pieces is the cross for their Christian beliefs. And then that circular element, you can't see it as well on this slide, but it is a gold, it's done in gold leaf. So that I'm saying that these people were our gold. They were the people who loved us, fought for us, and did everything they could to liberate us. This is the Harriet Tubman piece, and her symbol was a Sankofa symbol. The idea of reaching back to come forward. You have to know your past in order to be able to move into the future. And all the text that's on here on the gold disc are their words, things that I've researched that they've said at various times, either in speeches or had written. And then the original ones, when I did the original ones, they had what I called spirit portraits that were right next to them, little small shadow box spirit portraits. And like you can see here, the Ida B. Wells one has the sculpture that will be tacked up on her big piece. That's the drawing that's inside. So for Nat Turner, I did a Ogun, because he was a warrior. Ella Baker is one of wisdom and support of the youth. And then Ida B. Wells was a fertility figure, because she was consistently birthing new movements. And then this is a Tucson Louverture. So there were 4 women and 4 men from 3 different generations that I was honoring. This is the one of Tucson Louverture, who was the liberator of Haiti in the 1700s when he liberated the enslaved Africans from France. And once again, his words on the gold disc. And then here is a print, a silk screen that I did of Ida B. Wells. You will notice that her eyes are yellow. No, she is not jaundiced. She is what I have. She has what I call Oshun eyes. Oshun's color is yellow. So I will oftentimes do that in the pieces that I make. I will make those women have Oshun eyes, because Oshun was both a warrior woman, but also woman with great passion for her people. And then a saying that was one of the things that Ida B. Wells said: one had better die fighting injustice than die like a dog or a rat in a trap. She was a die-hard freedom fighter. I mean, she didn't give up till the day she died, basically. And then if you remember what I said about blue, I've encased her in blue to protect her. And then her image, I am not afraid of you, is on the left-hand side of her neck. That Udinkwa symbol, that's what that means. I am not afraid of you. And then behind these words is a scene, a very iconic scene that probably many of you have seen in history books, of a lynching where the families were out, the white families were literally out there like this was a piece of entertainment for them. So that's the image that's behind these words of hers. And she fought tirelessly for anti-lynching, a bill that did not actually get passed, but she fought to have one passed in order to stem the tide of the lynchings that were happening at the turn of the 20th century. And then because my mentor, Elizabeth Catlett, told me that you can use your work in the service of justice. She used to do posters for the NAACP and SNCC and some other CORE and other organizations, and then they could sell those posters and make money. And so I was working with EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, and I was telling Brian that I wanted to do something. I didn't know what, but I wanted to do something. And I had given him the print as a gift, and he said, well, what about this print? Well, can we do something with that? So I said, oh, wow, yeah, I could make this into a poster. So this poster was made by them, and they sell it in the gift shop of the new lynching museum that is opened in Montgomery. So that was my way of, at that time, I didn't have a lot of money. So it was like, this is one thing that I can do, is to donate my image to EJI. So that's how that print was used. And now you can see what I was talking about in terms of it being in conversation with the I Could Be Angry All the Time piece. This is how that was set up in the African American Museum. And then I was invited to do an exhibition by a group of women quilters. And I'm not a quilter, but my friend was, and she decided that even though I wasn't, she wanted me to be a part of it. And they were doing these what she called story quilts, coats. And she gave each artist just a blank canvas coat and said, what we're doing is we're relating it to music, so you can do whatever you want. And I don't think she quite expected me to do this, but this is what I chose to do. I took Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn and did a piece that looked at the hypocrisy of Mississippi, the front of it being what you have see in terms of the magnolia trees, the old South with all the happy slaves and butterflies and flowers and the song, the Mississippi State song. That's what you see on the front of this piece. And then on the back of it, you have the Black reality of what happened in Mississippi. You know, you have Medgar Evers' murder, you have Emmett Till's murder, you have Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner murder, the SNCC workers who were working to register voters. And then all of the words of Mississippi Goddamn Song I wrote throughout that, along with, you know, images of the Klan and the flag, the inverted American flag, because I feel like that's, you know, Mississippians at that time were going totally against everything that America stood for, but because it was being done to Black people, not a lot was thought of it. And then the burning crosses, of course, you know, they were big to use Christianity as a weapon. And so that's what's on the back of this piece. And then I've put it as like a crucifix like image hanging from the ceiling. And then across from that, it is in conversation with a piece that I did to acknowledge Henrietta Lacks, who those of you who may remember, her DNA was the DNA that was harvested without her permission or her family's permission by the medical community at Johns Hopkins. And billions of dollars were made off of this DNA because it's been used to cure cancers and all kinds of other things. And the family lived in poverty. And, you know, like I said, until Oprah Winfrey sort of brought all of this to the attention of America, most people knew nothing about this story. So what I did was I created this shrine, essentially, to her. You'll see encased in the blue frame, a drawing that I did taken from the book that was done on her, of her in a ghost image with a pigeon and a goat that would be sacrifices to Oshun at her side. And then a blue rooster over her head. And below that, in a bed of sand, are yams, which would be considered sacrificed elements to Oshun. And this piece has been done several times. And so each time I take the yams from the previous exhibit, which have now turned and sort of fossilized, I keep them in the exhibit so that I will add new, fresh yams, and then they'll fossilize, and then all of those will be put into the next iteration of this. Her actual DNA is what's inside the family frames. And then on the side of this armature is the names of doctors starting in the 1700s who did medical research on Black people all the way up to the 1960s. So, you know, each of those names has a date for that doctor in terms of when he was practicing, just to sort of highlight the fact that her case was not an anomaly. She was a part of a long line of Black people who have been experimented on by doctors. The most famous of them being, you know, what recently we've had highlighted in New York, Dr. Sims, who was a gynecologist who did gynecological research on Black women with no anesthesia. We just recently had a play done by Soul Rep that explored that whole horrific situation. And then I put in the back, because it was like a way to remind people of what doctors are supposed to be, the Hippocratic Oath, of which, you know, the primary statement in there that resonates with me is that I will do no harm, because all of these doctors did great harm to these people. And then I began to explore certain topics that just seemed that needed to be explored. I began to look at this notion of the one drop theory. And I did a whole series of works that looked at the fallacy of that, you know, the idea that if you had one drop of Black blood, you were Black. And, you know, and then looking at the two dictionary definitions of those two words, Black and white, and of course, Black, everything that's associated with Black is supposed to be bad, and everything associated with white is supposed to be good. And then giving you what were real delineations, racial delineations that we had in this country to label the amount of Black blood that you have. So that's what those proportions are at the bottom of the little striped painting. And then the we are, who says, you know, one drop, that's such a stupid thing, because after all, you know, race is a social construct. we know that. These pieces were also a part of that exploration. The image starting with and these are all definitions taken out of the dictionary, a Negro, a mulatto, and an octoroon. And what I did was I used a figure and then just mutated it. The eyes remain the same through each one of those. And what changes is, nose, mouth, and hair based on the amount of white that a Black person would have in them. But notice that they never get to be white. They are always some gradation of a Negro. So that's what these three pieces are exploring. And then I have two pieces that are in conversation with each other. One that's very contemporary, the hashtag Born to Die with a question mark, babies in the target on the wall to the right, and then to the left, a piece called How Many Laws Does It Take to Make a Black Person Free? And then in quotation marks, in parentheses, is this a trick question? Because the little books that are underneath that Fannie Lou Hamer statement, sometimes it seems like to tell the truth today is to run the risk of being killed. But if I fall, I'll fall 5 feet, 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. I'm not backing off. That was her statement that she made as she was doing voter registration. And as you probably know, if you know Fannie Lou Hamer's story, she was brutally beaten in prison when she tried to do this. And it's what ultimately killed her. She had liver damage that ultimately killed her. But, and this is the piece that I did, hashtag Born to Die, in year before last, in response to the Tamir Rice killings and some of the other children that were being killed by police. And then these are the books. I started with the beginning laws of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and made my way all the way up to the 1965 Civil Rights Acts. And these covers that I had on these, it started with barbed wire on the image, and then thorns, rose thorns, and then mudcloth, African mudcloth, to sort of symbolize the journey that Black people have gone through to try to be free. And still, here we are. I mean, these pieces were done in 1992. And here we are in 2021, still talking about voter suppression and the ability of Black people to have a vote, to be fully American. And then I did a series of works that were part of an exhibition entitled Paradise/Hell, that looked at the idea that one person's paradise might be another person's hell, depending on their circumstances. I was spending a lot of time in Costa Rica, where I have some projects that I'm working on. And I have a business partner down there who is Costa Rican, who we'd be laying on the beach looking around. And I was so impressed with the beauty of that place. I was taking pictures of all kinds of things. That these palms are from that place. And as I was looking at it, I turned to Elia and I said, this is a paradise, but I'm betting that my ancestors wouldn't have thought that, because they were enslaved here. And she said, yeah, you're right. And she talked a little bit about what she knew about that. So I started doing this series of works that were exploring that notion that one person's paradise is another person's hell. And this particular piece is called She Dreams of Paradise. And this installation had an actual soundtrack. It was songs that had lyrics around paradise. This one came from Phil Collins's She Dreams of Paradise. And this iconic image is one of a Black woman, African woman enslaved, and they would muzzle those that were not cooperative. And so she has Oshun eyes. Remember, I told you about the yellow in the eyes. She has Oshun eyes, which shows you she will not be taken down even though she's muzzled. And that's what this piece was about. This other piece was in that series was about Caribbean enslavement, using the song Smile, smile though your heart is weary, smile. That's what this song is punctuating the images. And slavery went on for so long in the Caribbean that it actually was still going on when photographs were taken. So the last image is actually a photograph of enslaved people in the Caribbean. And then hope, which is another piece that I did. I did a lot of research on 2 slave ships, one from Portugal and one from Spain, both of which were called Hope, Esperanza and Esperange. And both of these, I took the first date that the slave ships started going out and then the last date so that you could see how incrementally there became more and more people kidnapped. And the Spanish and the Portuguese actually did write the names of these Africans down. So they're there. And that's what these are. These are the actual names that were in the slavers' logs that I put on top of a image of a slave ship. And then based on the campaign that's very contemporary of Say Their Names, that's my sort of connection to the past and the present. So that's what this piece is about. And then you kind of have to have a contemporary conversation, and so I do. This conversation is about the impact of hip hop on Black womanhood. And here we are. I feel a lot of the reason why these young women have allowed themselves to be sexualized in the way that they are is because they have no idea whose shoulders they stand on. So you'll see these 2 young women standing on top of the heads of amazing Black women throughout history who have fought hard and long for us not to be sexualized, but they know nothing about these women. So that is why they can allow themselves, because they do it freely, no one puts a gun to their head, they do it freely, to become sex objects, basically. The white rooster, once again, as I said, you will see it throughout my work, is about the ancestors. So it's perched on that child's head, but it's not penetrating. She doesn't know who these people are. They're flanked by the Mende heads, which the Mende women are a very powerful group. It's a matrilineal society in Sierra Leone. I use that image oftentimes to talk about Black feminism. So that's at the bottom of each of these totems. And they're clueless. So this particular group is called If Only She Knew. And then my son told me when I started doing the Hoochie Mama series, which is the next one, he said, "Ma, you got to take responsibility for some of this because some of you women in your age group raised these women." So I said, "You're right, son. We do have to say, where did we go wrong?" So this series, the next 3 pieces are, where did we go wrong? How did we fail these women in not having them know whose shoulders they stand on? And so these pieces looked at, you see the blue line is broken around this woman. She's beginning to get herself seen, the clothing's getting scant. Inside the circle are lyrics from rap songs, and then surrounding them are African proverbs that talk about self-respect. Bottom of the piece is bling, beginning to bling out. And then with each piece, they get progressively worse. The lyrics get worse, and so does the line, till we end with this piece where we have the ancestors going, "We don't know what to do for this child. We have to just suck this protection line up because we can't help her. She's too far gone." And so you see the rooster on her head, it's gotten very small. You see the sculpture, these are all women, these are all African sculptures of women about female deity. And down at the bottom, it's all totally blinged out. It's all jewels. And then inside, it's one of the more misogynistic lyrics from a rap song. And then around it, still trying to save her, are the proverbs about her, what a woman should be in terms of their commitment to the community and what have you. So this is how they were set up in the African American Museum. So you could see that these ancestors were in the same room as these young women, because for me, the answer is them knowing their history. Without that, anything goes awry. And so that's the end of my show. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and see where we are. Okay.
Oh my goodness, that was just wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I know everybody is at home applauding. That was spectacular.
Thank you.
We do have some questions,
Mhm.
so I will start asking in no particular order. Was your work always for social commentary?
From the time that I graduated from the time that I was in graduate school, yes. Undergraduate, it fluctuated. I was really just sort of exploring materials at that point. I hadn't really found my voice, so to speak. But from the time that I got into graduate school, getting my MFA, my whole MFA exhibition, in fact, was a exhibition about this was now we're talking 1973. That was talking about all of the unrest on Black campuses, and was on the idea of police brutality. I was dealing with a lot of things around police brutality at that time. So all of that exhibition was sculptural, and it was about that. And then from then on, the work was absolutely about looking at issues around social commentary.
Okay. And our next question, let me see if I can get it where I can read it. Did the death of George Floyd change how you presented your retrospective?
No, I mean, sadly, the death of George Floyd was something that could have easily fit in to what I've been talking about for years. The retrospective had already been mounted. It actually opened in 2019 in Houston. So that was what it was. I mean, that came in. But what I did have influence, George Floyd's murder did influence the way in which I approached doing the installation that I had at the Nasher, because what I wanted to do was to try to create a healing space. Because we have been under such attack, and the pain of that has been so destructive that I have used wherever I could my ability to create these what I call healing spaces for the Black community. So that's what, that's how I would say, not my retrospective, because that, as I said, that was already mounted, and that the museum in Fair Park got that from Houston intact. But certainly the piece that I did this year in January was influenced by that event.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question is, got to get where I can see. How did growing up in Philadelphia in a racist era influence you, and how?
Well, I'm probably the same horror stories that other people who didn't live in the South had. I mean, I was in high school under the Rizzo. He became mayor, but he was the police chief at the time. Chief Rizzo, Frank Rizzo, who was a ultra racist. And he literally had his police force terrorizing Black people in Philadelphia during that time. You may have seen the images of the Black Panther Party that he raided one of their headquarters and then stripped those men down naked to humiliate them in Philadelphia. And I grew up, like I said, I had parents who were very heavily involved in the civil rights movement. So we were constantly on picket lines and, engaged in all kinds of freedom work that the whole time that I was growing up. So it was certainly not anything that I was not hyper aware of. And of course, Philadelphia was a segregated city at that time, with only one community being intentionally integrated, and that was Mount Airy. We lived in North Philadelphia, so we moved to Mount Airy at some point, but I was almost in high school by that time. So we were very aware of the racially dividedness of Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, quite frankly, I mean, it's the seat of independence and democracy and all of that, but it also is one of the most racist cities in the North. And you had whole Black neighborhoods destroyed. You had riots you know, which we knew were rebellions, but you know, those happened in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia was not immune from all of the racial tension that we have seen throughout the United States. And everybody needs to understand that for me, the Mason-Dixon line was Canada, because everything below that, you know.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, very much so. One panelist said, I could not read the African proverbs around the circles. I would love to know what they said, please.
Well, I would love to tell you, except that I can't tell you right now because I don't have them in front of me, and they are those pieces were done in 2002, so I don't have them on my. But I can tell you what they were, which ones I chose. I can give you an idea of why I chose the ones I did. All of the proverbs spoke to the idea of your commitment to community and upholding your family name and the pride that one takes in your community. They all spoke to that kind of an idea. So I'm trying to think of it. Well, no, I couldn't possibly tell you what each one of them says because I'd have to go back and get my notes to tell you. And I wrote them in both Yoruba and English. So there was a Yoruba saying, but then the English translation.
Okay, all right. Another question is, how is the purpose and deep meaning of your work communicated to people who see it, who are not familiar with the iconography and might miss its intent?
Well, I started doing symbols keys a long time ago because I recognized, well, I was told by my ex-husband, actually, you need to do something to let people know what this says. So for instance, at the Nasher exhibition, there is a symbols key in both English and Spanish. So everybody knows what it is. And it speaks to everything that I told you, what the blue means, what the roosters mean, and all of that. And the exhibition that was up at the African American Museum, there was wall text that gave you indication of what kinds of symbols to look for. And then in my catalog is that, you know, for that show, there's all the conversation is about, you know, what I've done with symbolism. So once a person gets to know my work, they usually, my friends will tell you, they knew exactly what I was saying in this piece because they saw the rooster here or the turtle there or whatever. So that you get to see that this is my language. This is my visual language.
And your catalog, you mentioned your catalog is available on your website for purchase if everyone wants to go to your website. And Lynn, if you will put that in the chat so that people will have her website at their fingertips.
Yes, ma'am.
Another question we have is there any African country that has been more of an influence in your work and life than any others?
Yes, that would be Nigeria. That would be two countries. That would be two countries, Nigeria and Ghana. And Nigeria, because of the my affinity for looking at the Yoruba religion, and Ghana, because that is actually where my grandmother tracked us back to. So the Udinkwa symbols will show up a lot in my work. They're from Ghana. The spirituality and the cosmology, however, is based on the African Yoruba religion of Ifa. So those kinds of spirituality questions all are coming from Nigeria.
Okay.
And also because if you look at America's African population, you know, African American population, most of us came from West Africa. And Nigeria and Ghana had two of the largest importations than any other African group. Now, the piece that I just did at the Nasher has all 11 of the African tribes that were in this country, but they didn't necessarily all have the same numbers taken. So, you know.
Okay. Another comment and a question. So poignant. Your explanations were so helpful. What do you think would be helpful for all of us to know to continue to work for equity?
Well, you know, it's an ongoing struggle, unfortunately, and especially in a country that doesn't want to admit that it has done some of the things that it has done in order to keep us unequal. But I feel that as long as you are keeping yourself aware of what is real and do some research, because, you know that we don't necessarily get the truth in the textbook. And then aligning yourself with movements that are, working for social justice. I mean, that's the most effective way to have change occur. Is what we saw it. We saw it when George Floyd was killed for the first time. Now I've been in, like I said, I grew up in a family. My grandmother and grandfather were both activists. And they died in the early 70s, and they were at 90. My grandmother was 90, just about 90 when that happened. So you know how long they've been in it. My parents the same, us the same. For the first time, when George Floyd was killed, I saw something that I've never seen before, and that is almost across the board, America went crazy. And it primarily was young white people who were like not buying into their parents' narrative about, what they should and should not believe, who were outraged. And then, of course, some of the older white people also began to see, oh, this is not just them complaining and calling, using the race card. This is real. And then you saw, like you saw in the civil rights movement, a global impact of that action, because people were protesting all over the world the injustice done to African immigrants in European countries, and in Asia. You saw some of these kinds of things happen. So it was across the board a global response to one incident in Minneapolis. And I think people were just at that. I really believe America's at a tipping point. We're either going to go down the road of total destruction, or we're going to see what happened over the last 4 or 5 years as being a wake-up call, and January 6th being the like sort of period on top of that says, are we going to allow democracy to just disappear, or are we going to fight for it? And I think we're beginning to see that people are willing to fight for it. So that's what I would say, is to stay aware and stay involved.
I'm going to put two questions together that were asked. Do you have works for sale? Where can we buy? And then another question, is the Nasher exhibit still up?
No, the Nasher exhibit closed this past week. They kept it. It was supposed to be closing on the 14th, and they kept it open an extra few days because of the storm that people couldn't see it. But it's now deinstalled. And as far as sales of the work, I'm going to say at some point, all that work that was at the African American Museum is going to be for sale, because I don't want to take it home. But prior to having this retrospective exhibition, truthfully, I'd never seen all of my work together like that, because all of those pieces were done for specific shows. And my main work, installation, is commissioned work. So I'd be commissioned by a museum to do an installation, and that's how that would get done. And installations by their very nature are ephemeral. They're here today, gone tomorrow. So it's great that I was able to see all of that discrete work in one place. I was amazed myself at, well, of course, what was more amazing is that those conversations I was having are still germane today. That was what was so sad about my work. But yeah, it's all going to be for sale. Every last stitch of it.
Very good, very good. And then you wanted to, this evening, please tell us at 6, you are going to.
Yeah, the affirmations, the piece at the Nasher was a interactive piece, meaning that the installation asked people who came and saw it to write an affirmation to the Black community and put it in a basket in the space. And so I've been collecting the affirmations. And the first week when it closed on the 14th, Marion Marshall, who was my dear friend, and she had suggested to me that we might do a reading of these affirmations. So we did. We read I read affirmations, and she talked about the work, and I'm doing that again today at 6 o'clock. I'll do the final, because we wanted to do it throughout Black History Month. I'll do the final reading today at 6 o'clock. And it takes about an hour, to read them. And, what I noticed is that this last group, the people that came through these last weeks, some of these people wrote dissertations. Just a little square paper. And I was just, wow, got a lot of words on this little paper. But I'm grateful because it tells me that, people were willing to take the time and think about what they were seeing and then respond.
Well, one thing, your work is a history lesson.
Absolutely.
And did you intend that when
Absolutely.
you began, or is that something that evolved?
No, I do a lot of research for the work that I do. And so I do believe that history is critical. And the reason that we're in the bind that we're in is because we have had so little done around other people's history other than white people. And so for me, I am absolutely intentional about making the work not just a piece of art, but a piece of history.
How did you learn the African symbols and the African language that you have incorporated?
I do a lot of research. I mean, I have all kinds of texts in my own personal library on the things that I present. So it's, everything that I've put out there is something that I've had to research. Now it's easier than it was when I first started, because, back then I had to go to interlibrary loan, which maybe people don't even know what that is anymore.
That's true.
What? Yeah. But now, of course, I can go online and find much of the types of things that I want to research are online. But yeah, it's all there. I mean, I have text upon text on Yoruba culture and Yoruba religion and proverbs and things of that nature.
Well, we've been asked, so I'd just like you to say one more time, how do people participate this evening at 6 to be able to hear or see?
The Instagram live handle is at, the little symbol at Marion, Marion, Adele, Adele, and it's in the chat as well. That's the Instagram live address for this evening at 6. All
right. Well, what a treat and a pleasure for us to get to meet you and to have you share. I'm in awe and just so pleased. Thank you. Thank you to Nelda Golden and our Vice President of Programming, and to Brenda Jackson for introducing us to you, and for Lynn Towery and all her work behind the scenes. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you're able to join us at one of our upcoming programs. As soon as this program is ready for viewing, we will send you the link where you can see the recording and share it with others if you like. Thank you again so much, Vicki. Such a pleasure.
For having me.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Happy Black History Month.
That's right.
Thank you.